Barakatuh everyone. I just love his recitation, especially this is Islam Subhi's recitation, by the way, and Surah Al-Shara. It is actually my favorite, especially after I guess he did some practice and got some ijazah work, but before that his recitation was horrible in its tajweed. But this time I guess he did do some practice, it seems like some training, and he got his ijazah, it seems like, because his recitation absolutely changed. But we're going to get to our topic today, inshallah, and we're going to talk about continuing Surah Yusuf, but a number of things that I actually wanted to mention, which I forgot to say last time. So we talked about the event where Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, makes this plan to see how they are, test their piety, and really sees that they were really considerate over their father, and it seemed like that they were showing repentance because they were really considerate over applying their words, the words of their father, and making sure that they don't lose their brother after what they had done many years back to Yusuf alayhi salam. And of course we talked about how Prophet Yaqub alayhi salam was telling them that he wanted any sign that they were honest for it, that they were honest to bring Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam's brother back, or if he were to give them Prophet Yusuf's brother Benjamin or Benjamin, that he would bring them, that he would accept to give him to them. And they also had applied their father's words when he said to enter from different doors, and then they go inside, and that's when Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, he would bring in his brother and comfort his brother, and of course that's when he puts that utensil inside their belongings, and then بدأ بأوعيتهم قالوا يسرق فقد سرق أخا له من قبل. Then goes on, they go back to their father, and Prophet Yaqub alayhi salam, after Prophet Yusuf's brothers had lost hope in convincing the king to give them Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam's brother, that's when they basically go back to their father after discussing it amongst themselves. They go back to their father, and then they would ask their father to forgive them because they had no fault in this whatsoever. But then Prophet Yaqub alayhi salam is still not convinced because of what they had committed before. And this is also very important to keep in mind, is that when somebody has like a background or a past history, a history of committing one thing, it's going to be really hard to believe them the second time after doing the same exact pattern. So this is even part of Islam, in where if somebody, for example, let's just assume that somebody is known or has a history of being a thief, then they can't be in a place of walaya, in a place of authority where they are responsible over money, because they had shown their weaknesses on money. Same thing if we are to talk about somebody that is an offender, meaning a sex offender, and they had a past history of that, then in that situation we would then keep that past, that history, that background that is related to them in our records, and therefore we won't put them in a position when we're talking about walaya here. When we're talking about walaya, this is not to mean that that's it, this is the end of their life, but when it relates, even if they had repented, when it relates to a specific matter that they had a history that showed their weakness relating to that, probably people's wealth or probably people's a'rad or etc., then that would mean when we consider and we put them in place of authority, we have to keep that record in mind, even if they had repented to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We have to keep it in mind, especially if we're talking about putting them in a place of authority. And this is the same thing when, for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually talks about in a situation where somebody has committed qadf. Al-qadf is when somebody might accuse another woman, another man that are innocent, accuse them of committing zina, for example, that would be considered qadf if they did not have 4 witnesses. And the ayah was really clear, وَلَا تَقْبَلُ لَهُمْ شَهَادَةً أَبَدًا, if they did not bring those witnesses. So therefore, when we're talking about walaya, this is really important to keep in mind, is that when we're talking about a person being put in a position of authority, we will still keep their records at present, or at least we have to keep that record in our mind in order to make sure that they are qualified to do such a thing, especially if it involves some kind of a walaya, some kind of authority. We can't, even if they had repented, we have to keep it in mind, because this may involve other people's lives, or may involve other people's property, or it's an amana. So this is part of the amana. So just keep that in mind. A lot to say about this. Anyhow, Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, or Prophet Yaqub alayhi salam, goes into complete sorrow after Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam had left, and which is what we see in the words that he was saying, وَقَالَ يَا أَسَفَا عَلَى يُوسُفَ وَبْيَضَّتْ عَيْنَهُ مِنَ الْحُزْنِ فَهُوَ كَظِيمٌ. In that Prophet Yaqub alayhi salam, we could see that from the words that he was going into complete sorrow, and still remembering that sorrow that had resulted not only his psychological situation, but even his physical side, in where it affected his sight. Min al-huzn fahuwa kadhim, that he was in complete sorrow, in complete sadness, although he was in a great iman. But it is absolutely normal, it is part of our human side, is that when we go in complete sorrow, especially due to a trauma, that it can happen that we can go in situations of probably sadness, or a complete depression, or all that. And we know that this doesn't only happen to us, but this also happens to prophets. We could see that Prophet Yaqub alayhi salam, the despair, the sadness that he was in, affected even his sight. And this isn't only in Prophet Yaqub alayhi salam, but also when we look at for example, certain scholars, when we talk about Al-Ghazali, for example, Al-Ghazali himself actually went into great sadness, and some moment of sadness, in where he totally left dealing with people. He isolated himself away from people after even being a scholar in Al-Madrasa Al-Nizamiya, in a Nizamiya school, and he was actually the head, he was the principal. But then he felt a moment where he had to leave all that power that he was in, and that he considered it as what brought in not the ilm, but actually the nur that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had put in his heart. So it's totally different. He felt that it was more of a moment where it was learning not the ilm, only the practical side of the ilm, but learning how to use and focus on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and focus on sincerity over the knowledge, and the knowledge and the degrees themselves, and those areas of ilm. And this is really important to keep in mind, because it is, the scholars used to say shaghalatna al-adilla an al-madlul, that we many times we're so focused on the evidences and discussing the evidences, like even when we're talking about fiqh, we're so focused on the evidences, and so focused on this and how they responded and all that stuff, and then we forget the madlul, we forget the main focal point, which is, for example, salah, or which is dhikr, or all that side to it, that spiritual side. And this is so common that we can get easily pacified away from the most important issue here, which is, in this situation, for example, connecting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it is part of us, in where قَالُوا تَاللَّهِ تَفْتَأُ تَذْكُرُ يُوسُف. So now, what did the people around him say? They just said, you still تَفْتَأُ. It's like you still remember Yusuf, حَتَّى تَكُونَ حَرَضًا, until it actually starts going into making this illness, like حتى تكون, until you become so ill, أو تكون من الهالكين, or you would probably die out of all that sorrow that you are in. And what sorrow was he in from? Well, he was in the sorrow from Yusuf alayhi salam, because it's been such a long time. So why is it Yusuf and not the son that was taken from the king? Because at least he knows, even if he was at the king's palace, he still knows where he is. But for Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, there's not any shred of sign, there's not a single shred, any piece, any information, any sign. It's like he just vanished into air, where can't get any information whatsoever about him. All of the sudden, the same story happens again. And that's the thing, is that when one trauma happens, another thing that has some similitude to it, it just all of a sudden brings back the trauma. So what happened to Prophet Yaqub's a second son? It right away, Prophet Yaqub alayhi salam never forgot Yusuf alayhi salam, but it just opened the wound again. It just opened the wound again. And that's why they said, تَذْكُرُ Yusuf. It's like you can't just close the wound that never closed about Yusuf alayhi salam. And still, قَالَ إِنَّمَا أَشْكُو بَثِي وَحُزْنِي إِلَى اللَّهِ. So that at that moment he said, إِنَّمَا أَشْكُو. I'm only, in other words, I'm not here complaining to you. I'm not here putting and laying out my sorrows to you, because in the end, is that what can you do? And this is really important for us to learn, is that you can complain to people all you want, but they are in reality as weak as you are. Yes, they may have some powers, probably ilm, probably money to give you the support, probably the wisdom to help you heal. All those different things are definitely things that can uplift us, that can get us out of the situation that we're in. But here Prophet Yaqub alayhi salam knew that قَالَ إِنَّمَا أَشْكُو بَثِي وَحُزْنِي. He said, the only reason why I'm complaining, or the only one that I complain to, أَشْكُو بَثِي وَحُزْنِي إِلَى اللَّهِ. I only complain البث and الحزن. What is the difference between البث and الحزن? البث and الحزن, where one is where the sadness is directly related to that event, directly related to that matter. But الحزن can be a general sorrow, general sadness that may not be directly related to that trauma, but it still is part of that dynamics of the different areas that will pile up. It will still affect us. You might have had an abusive father, probably, or abusive relative. That abuse might have, all right, it's gone. The father or the person might not be there anymore, but that sorrow is still affecting you until today. That pain is still affecting you today, even though that person is probably dead or gone. The effect is still happening today. That pain is still inflicted. It's still inflicted in many different ways. It probably affected your ability to cope in the world around you, to probably cope in the social dynamics, or probably cope in work, or probably cope in getting your education. All those different areas, they didn't necessarily be a direct relationship, but because you were broken, because you were hurt, that affected your ability to function within the society. So when we're talking about ashku bathi wa huzni, this is that lesson for us to learn, that we complain to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's what Prophet Yaqub alayhi salam was doing. He's only complaining to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, his sorrows, his sadness. وَأَعْلَمُ مِنَ اللَّهِ مَا لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Now here, وَأَعْلَمُ مِنَ اللَّهِ مَا لَا تَعْلَمُونَ, we can actually see that Prophet Yaqub alayhi salam, they can sense that there is some kind of a أعلم من الله ما لا تعلمون, that there's a hint, that there is something that he was looking forward to, that he knew some information, wahi, that there was going to be something coming up. يا بني اذهبوا فتحسسوا من يوسف وأخيه. Now his dear sons, يا بني اذهبوا, oh dear sons, اذهبوا, go and فتحسسوا, فتحسسوا, and seek. The word tahassus is like, any sense, any feeling, anything that you could find, anything, any feeling that you might find. And what are they up in search for? Yusuf wa akhi. In search for Yusuf and his brother. وَلَا تَيْأَسُوا مِنْ رَوْحِ اللَّهِ. Why وَلَا تَيْأَسُوا مِنْ رَوْحِ اللَّهِ? Because it is actually part of us in where we could feel the sorrow, but because of that deep sorrow that we're feeling that we can't even take a deep breath. We're feeling that as if it's actually choking us from our throats. That pain is choking us from our throats. We can't even ventilate. Even when we talk about it, yes, it may help to let us at least get some of those feelings out. But Prophet Yaqub alayhi salam says, وَلَا تَيْأَسُوا مِنْ رَوْحِ اللَّهِ. In other words, that ventilation, that breath that you take, لا تيأسوا من روح الله. Remember, don't lose hope in روح الله. Even in روح الله, the روح الله is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's ability, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's potentials, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's powers, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the hidden secrets that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had put inside things. إِنَّهُ لَا يَيْأَسُ مِنْ رَوْحِ اللَّهِ إِلَّا الْقَوْمُ الْكَافِرُونَ. Because the only ones that will lose hope, in other words, they would consider that there is no way out of all this. The only ones are the ones that are in denial in the powers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is really important because faith in Allah is actually related directly to what you believe who a God is. What is a God, who a God is, and what descriptions does a God have, or does Allah have? And that's why when we look at, for example, when we look at suicide, when we look at suicide, for example, we could see that in the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's always that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is qahhar, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is qadir, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is capable, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is ala kulli shay'in qadir. All those different names are really to tell us that you're supposed to connect yourself from the materialistic results of things, from the materialistic cause and effect of things, to actually connecting yourself to the one that controls the cause and effect of things. There's a difference, because when a person commits suicide, for example, they're actually connecting themselves to the materialistic powers in understanding the world around them. Probably their own powers, or probably others' powers, or in the world, the materialistic things. They're connecting themselves with the cause and effect, or those patterns, based on the materialistic side of them. And they, at that moment, at least when they had committed suicide, they lost their deep iman to seeing beyond the materialistic things and relate to the one that controls all the patterns and the sunan al-kawniyya, all the patterns and all those different things that keep the world intact, that keep the world in the way it is. And that is why he says, لا ييأس من روح الله إلا القوم الكافرون. The only ones that would lose hope in the powers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are actually القوم الكافرون, are those that are in denial of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why denial of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Because if you deny the descriptions and the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that would by definition mean that you denied God Almighty Himself. Because if you deny who God is or what God is, then that would actually mean you denied God Himself, because you didn't believe in the different details of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. فَلَمَّا دَخَلُوا عَلَيْهِ. Now, this ayah is taking us into a different scene. There was that scene where Prophet Yaqub alayhi salam was holding that discussion with his children and the people around him. Then takes us to another scene. The scene now. Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam's brothers. We're just going to go on and call them brothers now. The brothers, what do? فَلَمَّا دَخَلُوا عَلَيْهِ. They enter, دخلوا on Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam. Now they're going into the palace, but they didn't want to talk to Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam himself. Now they didn't really know who he is yet. They just know he's probably the head of the treasurer and he's an important person, but they wanted to go even farther to the person responsible and said, Ya ayyuhal aziz, oh al-aziz. Now they're talking to him directly, calling him by the name. Massana wa ahlana ad-dur. Massana wa ahlana ad-dur, meaning dur, hardship and complete sorrow has actually affected us and our family. وَجِئْنَا بِبِضَاعَةٍ مُزْجَةٍ. And we even came with properties, or we came with merchandise that is absolutely muzja. It's not of any value. فَأَوْفِ لَنَا الْكَيْلَ وَتَصَدَّقْ عَلَيْنَا. فَأَوْفِ لَنَا الْكَيْلَ, meaning give us some of the goods. وَتَصَدَّقْ عَلَيْنَا, and even add an increase out of your own goodness, out of your own piety, because we don't really have something that is of equal or good merchandise or good things. But وَتَصَدَّقْ عَلَيْنَا, like you do, because you're absolutely a good person, so you do from your own goodness. Tasaddaq alayna, give us the sadaqah as well. Inna Allah yarzi al-mutasaddiqeen. We don't really have the ability. Verily, Allah is the one to compensate those that give al-mutasaddiqeen, those that give sadaqah. قال هل علمتم ما فعلتم بيوسف وأخيه. Now here you could see that when the ayah says فلما دخلوا عليه, that they entered and Yusuf alayhi salam was there and Al-Aziz was there, but the brothers, they didn't direct the words at Yusuf alayhi salam. They just directed the words at Al-Aziz, because to them they lost hope in Yusuf alayhi salam. So what they did was they started talking to Al-Aziz, but then Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam speaks up. قال هل علمتم ما فعلتم بيوسف وأخيه. Do you remember? And this is like a question, but this is more of tawbih. Tawbih is like it's more of a not a derogatory, but more of trying to scold the person. So Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam is putting a question here, but the question contains within it a scolding tense or a scolding format. هل علمتم ما فعلتم بيوسف وأخيه. Do you actually remember what you had done to Yusuf and his brother? إذ أنتم جاهلون, when you were jahilun. When you were jahilun means what? So when we look at that ayah, you could see that Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, he didn't say who he was. He just said, remember what you did with Yusuf and his brother. إذ أنتم جاهلون, when you were in a state of Jahiliya. Why do you say when you were in a state of Jahiliya? Because this is actually telling them that he is seeing a sign from the way that he dealt with them, kept his brother. They were so concerned on bringing their brother back. They were in that determination, ilhah, to tell the king, convince the king to give their brother back. But he said, إِذْ أَنْتُمْ جَاهِلُونَ. He just reminded them, when you were in Jahiliyyah. In other words, he gave them a hint that I do see that you changed. I do see that, that you were really in good conduct this time. But remember, it's still there. Remember what you had done during those times of Jahiliyyah, when you were just, what is Jahiliyyah? A Jahiliyyah is really basing things based on the materialistic terms. What does that mean? We could see that the word Jahiliyyah or Jahil in the Quran, or Jahl in the Quran, actually appears very many times in the Quran. We could see, for example, when Prophet Nuh alayhi salam, when we look at Prophet Nuh alayhi salam, when he asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bring his son, to do something with his son in regarding his son. What did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually tell him? He actually says that إِنِّي أَعِظُكَ أَن تَكُونَ مِنَ الْجَاهِلِينَ. I warn you from being a part of the Jahilin. Why? Because he actually said one very important thing. ونادى نوح ربه فقال ربي إن ابني من أهلي وإن وعدك الحق وأنت أحكم الحاكمين. He took that moment and he said, نادى نوح ربه. Nuh called on to his Lord Almighty, and he said, my Lord, my son is part of my family, and وَإِنَّ وَعْدَكَ الْحَقِّ. وَإِنَّ وَعْدَكَ الْحَقِّ, meaning in akhirah, your promises and all those things that you have said are actually true. وَأَنْتَ أَحْكَمُ الْحَاكِمِينَ, and you're the best of the ones, you're the best of those that judge. قَالَ يَا نُوحُ إِنَّهُ لَيْسَ مِنْ أَهْلِكَ. He said, Nuh, he's not part of your family. إِنَّهُ عَمَلٌ غَيْرُ صَالِحٍ. It is not a pious action. فَلَا تَسْأَلْنِ مَا لَيْسَ لَكَ بِهِ عِلْمٍ. Don't ask me about something that you don't have knowledge of. إِنِّي أَعِظُكَ أَن تَكُونَ مِنَ الْجَاهِلِينَ. I warn you to be from those that are jahilin. What do we get out of the word jahilin? It is when a person is relating their relationship with the world, with the people. In other words, their social dynamics, their financial dynamics, their even in the way that they look at the cause and effect and the patterns of their life and the future and the past. All that, if you're only connecting yourself with the materialistic side of it, that is al-jahilin. Let's go back to how Prophet Nuh alayhi salam was relating to his son. He was basically asking that, he said that my son is part of my family, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنِّي أَعِظُكَ أَن تَكُونَ الْجَاهِلِينَ. I warn you that you would أَعِظُكَ. It's like there's this reminder that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving him, that don't be from the jahilin. In other words, don't weigh the things around you, whether we're talking about the social relationship or financial or etc., based on jahiliyyah, based on the materialistic things. So what was Prophet Nuh alayhi salam really doing? He was saying that his son was part of his family, and therefore wanted to in that story, wanted to somehow moderate, or be that person between him and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in order to at least do something about it. But here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says he's not part of your family, because family is not an issue of a materialistic relationship. It's not an issue of blood, but it's an issue of amal salih. It's an issue of piety. And that's why he says, the ayah says, amalun ghayru salih. It is what he has done. What he had done is actually an action that is not pious. Same thing when we're looking at, for example, when Abu Dharr actually called Bilal ibn Rabah, he just called him the son of a black woman. What did Prophet Muhammad ﷺ actually tell him? He told him one very important thing, and he says, is it jahiliyyah when I'm still amongst you? Are you doing something that is of a jahiliyyah when I'm still amongst you, and you're still viewing people that because he is of a different color, because he is the son of a black woman, you viewed him that he was less than you. You thought that he was somehow not at the level as you. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ says, a jahiliyyah, is this jahiliyyah when I'm still amongst you? And that's the same thing when we're talking about jahiliyyah. It's so important to look at the term jahiliyyah, because when we're looking at the term jahiliyyah, we're actually understanding that it is about seeing beyond the materialistic things. Even in the way you relate to your life, don't look at and focus on the materialistic matters of things, but go and look beyond. That's where that term, for example, Islam, is the opposite of Jahiliyyah. Why? Because Islam is giving you the key to seeing beyond the materialistic things of life. It's not matter in motion, as in Jahiliyyah, but it is actually beyond. In Islam, you're seeing that the world around you is actually constructed by Allah Almighty, and that He is the one that puts everything intact, and He is the one that is in control of the different things around us. So somebody had a question. AAW, you had a question. Go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, Aysha. I wanted to ask regarding Jahiliya. Is that in reference to like anything related to what they call scientific materialism, like with the natural world, our place in it, our social relations? Is that comparable to it?
It's very comparable, but it's not necessarily only that. Remember, Jahiliya actually comes in different forms. There was the Jahiliya of tribalism. There was the Jahiliya of paganism. There was the Jahiliya of idolatry. The Jahiliya comes in all those different forms, including the form that we see in our times today, which is the Jahiliya of that atheism, the new atheism, but considering everything is just matter in motion. Or it can also be a Jahiliya when you see legislature, that it is egocentricity, homocentricity, existentialism. All those different forms of Jahiliya are still within it, because when we look at Jahiliya, we're actually talking about what basis? What is the basis that you build your understanding about the world on? Is it the basis of the materialistic information that you have, the data? For example, the data that you have about the world could be that, cause and effect. You see that's within a one. Even if we're talking about different studies that are probably conducted in understanding human nature, in understanding physics, in understanding the world, in understanding astrophysics, whatever it is, all these different sides to it, those are just different data that you might have. But if you're only relating to the materialistic, the outer shell of it, that's when it becomes that Jahiliya, and it is about seeing beyond that in understanding how things function. How things function, whether we're talking about the physics, or whether we're talking about the creation, or whether we're talking about the social relations, or whether we're talking about even the financial. There's always that side where you could build data on it and say, well, this makes this, based on our data, which is speculation, based on our data, this is going to bring in prosperity, or this is going to bring in good connections, whatever good things that we're hoping in. This is within the speculation. Now, the other side, which is il-hawa, that is also another form of Jahiliya. So when we're looking at Jahiliya, the one form can be based on Jahiliya, can be based on the materialistic understanding of the world. The second Jahiliya can be our own inclinations. Our own inclinations could be our own inclinations to how we connect with our children more than we connect with others, and that's going to probably be a reason why we might oppress other children. And it could be the Jahiliya in where we relate with the world around us, where our inclinations might determine what is good and what is evil based on our own feelings. Then that within itself can be different ways where we might feel certain pleasure in doing a certain action and think that that is my evidence that this is a good matter, that this is a good thing, and then not realize that this is actually a very shallow understanding of the world, and therefore Jahiliya. Now the last part, which is al-wahi, is that al-wahi, when you relate with things and you see beyond that surface of the world around you, and you go to see in wahi, where you understand your relationship with the people around you, based on Islam, based on piety, based on La ilaha illallah. You go beyond the shallow side of it. You go beyond the surface. You actually see things based on the lens of La ilaha illallah, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the main markaz, is the center that I base my financial life, social, and the list goes on and on in the world around me. What is the center that I see the world in? So when we look at Islam, that is the opposite of Jahiliya. Now, the further one goes into Islam, that's when their perspective of things goes into a different a different angle, and that is the level of Iman. In the level of Iman, أن تؤمن بالله وملائكته وكتبه ورسله واليوم الآخر. Now you're going into another relationship and another perspective where you're seeing things beyond the materialistic things, in where you're relating everything in those hidden powers, the hidden powers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's hidden powers in what He gives the malaika as well, and the different understandings, the hidden powers, even in the hidden powers, even in the legislature, and how we view good and evil, how we view right and wrong, how we view ethics. We go beyond the materialistic ends, and we see it, and that which is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually says and considers that iman bil kutub and iman bil rusul, faith in Allah, faith in His messengers, and faith in the books, which is the side where you go beyond seeing the materialistic side of what makes and what defines morality. You actually connect it that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had defined morality in His books, which is also what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent the messengers, sent the messengers with. So, when we're talking about Iman, then we're going into a different perspective of things. So here, he basically said, إِذْ أَنْتُمْ جَاهِلُونَ. When you are in a state of Jahiliya, and you only considered those materialistic sides of what makes a person important, you considered that it was just about getting a good position with your father, but you didn't consider that it was actually in being in good contact and acting in the right conduct and acting in the right principles that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had determined. So he said, إِذْ أَنْتُمْ جَاهِلُونَ. Now, during that state, قَالُوا أَإِنَّكَ لَأَنْتَ يُوسُف. That's when they recognized there was a hint. When he reminded them of Yusuf, قالوا أئنك لأنت يوسف. Now they just responded أئنك. Notice this is all of them. أئنك لأنت يوسف. Are you Yusuf? Why أئنك? أئنك meaning that they were really sure, but they just needed one confirmation, is that he himself would confess that he is Yusuf himself. They were so sure, but they just needed one confirmation, and that Yusuf alayhi salam would actually admit to it. They were 99% sure, but they just needed that for him to actually admit it, that it is really him. So they questioned it, brought it in the form of question, aren't you Yusuf? So he said, Ana Yusuf. He said, I am Yusuf. وَهَذَا أَخِي. And this is my brother. It's not like they didn't know that was his brother, but he wanted to show them at that moment that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is capable of bringing those that are tafarraqu, those that have separated, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is capable of combining them and joining them again, no matter all the materialistic data that you can combine. You could say it's been so many years, the probability has gotten less that they will gather again. And when we look at the materialistic data, we will see that, based on our own speculation, that things have become impossible or near impossible. So Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam wanted to bring it to them, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's powers of even bringing the brothers, despite all those plots that they have done for Yusuf and also his brother, they have actually failed. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's powers is all beyond any materialistic plot, any materialistic plan, all those plans. قَدْ مَنَّ اللَّهُ عَلَيْنَا. Why Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam tells them, قَدْ مَنَّ اللَّهُ عَلَيْنَا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had brought the blessing, manna, meaning that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's blessing is actually upon us. He put it upon us. And إِنَّهُ مَن يَتَّقِ وَيَصْبِرْ. He didn't want to, at that moment, scold them deeper, but he just wanted to spare the moment and remind them, إِنَّهُ مَن يَتَّقِ وَيَصْبِرْ. Take that moment to remind them, to connect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. إِنَّهُ مَن يَتَّقِ وَيَصْبِرْ. Verily, whoever is مَن يَتَّقِ, whoever lives their life based on taqwa, مَن يَتَّقِ. In other words, notice here, مَن يَتَّقِ is actually in the past, in the present and future tense, meaning that the person is consistent with taqwa, and consistent with sabr, is consistent with patience. فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُضِيعُ أَجْرَ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. Then verily, Allah Almighty will not dismiss or lose or forget about or disregard the rewards of those that are in good, in ihsan, or living to the level of ihsan. Why to living to the level of ihsan? Remember, we said that there are different 3 levels. There's the level of iman and there's the level of ihsan. Where and why did he say muhsinin? Because when we're looking at iman, when we're looking at the level of iman, in order to live in the level of iman, it's a different level than Islam. In order to live in the level of iman, there has to be 2 things to let you live in the level of iman. It's taqwa and sabr. It's actually taqwa, where you are so keen on holding on to the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're holding on to the legislature of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're holding on to the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why the principles? Because when it comes to Islam, this is more of the mental side. What do you believe in? What is your faith? What are you putting in ground? How do you define the world around you? Yet, when we're looking at iman, it is putting a specific thing in practice, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's rulings. You're putting it into practice, and that is by putting 2 things into practice: taqwa and sabr. What is taqwa? Al-iman bit-tanzil. It's believing in the tanzil, believing in the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and al-ista'dad li-yawm al-rahil. And it's preparing yourself to that day where you're going to depart. It's preparing yourself for departure. Preparing yourself for departure is actually putting your things, your life, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had declared as piety or Jahiliya, that you would put those as the 2 centers that define how you live your life in. Now, if those 2 things are met, that is when, with more consistency of taqwa, in taqwa and sabr, that is what will get you into the final level of ihsan. In the final level of ihsan, which is when inna Allah la yudi'u ajra al-muhsinin. To get to the level of ihsan, you need 2 things to be at all times in your life: taqwa and ihsan. Considerate over taqwa and sabr, where you're considerate over Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's definitions of morality and principle. You put it into practice, and sabr, you're consistent with it. قالوا تالله لقد آثرك الله علينا. During that moment, of course, this is such a sudden shock to them. قالوا تالله. They said tallahi. Tallahi means by Allah. They're swearing by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with this shock. لَقَدْ آثَرَكَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْنَا. Verily, آثَرَكَ. Verily, آثَرَكَ. This is right now. Not tashqiq, but tahqiq. That's why it came in the past tense. What's the difference between tashqiq and tahqiq? When you say, for example, لَقَدْ or قَدْ يَأْتي, that he might come. But here it came لَقَدْ آثَرَكَ. Verily. Now here, tallahi, they did a number of different things to show and reflect that they are now in firm belief that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had blessed him and that he is actually in a better position than them, where they said, Tallahi, they swore by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they said, Laqad, verily, atharaka. They put it in the past tense where it became tahqiq, where it became that we are confirming here, atharaka Allahu alayna, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had made you better, in a better position, and has even chosen you upon us, in other words, before us. وَإِن كُنَّا لَخَاطِئِينَ, and we were in kunna, even though كُنَّا لَخَاطِئِينَ, وَإِن كُنَّا, when we were لَخَاطِئِينَ. خاطئين, there's that la to mean that verily, for sure, we were خاطئين, we were committing those mistakes, we were committing those sins. قال لا تثريب عليكم اليوم. Now here his response was لا تثريب عليكم اليوم. لا تثريب meaning there's no sin unto you today. How did he know that? This is part of al-wahi. He didn't just know that. It wasn't him forgiving them, but he is saying لا تثريب, that today there's the wahi. Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, يغفر الله لكم, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had forgiven you today. وَهُوَ أَرْحَمُ الرَّاحِمِينَ, and he is the most merciful one. He is the most merciful one. اذهبوا بقميصي هذا. Business is not yet finished. There's more to come. اذهبوا, go with my garment, with this garment that he is wearing. There's a specific garment that he was wearing, but this garment it seems like it was a sign. It was a sign, and back in the days, they would have some certain signs to tell about themselves. Remember, there wasn't that social media that we have today, so they would remain some certain things to remind them of a person or a situation, and they would keep it as a sign. So, Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, remember, there are two qamis garments for Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam mentioned in the story. The first qamis is when they took Prophet Yusuf's qamis and they soaked it with that blood, with that fake blood. And then another qamis, which is probably what relates to Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam. Of course, Yusuf alayhi salam said, well, here's the sign. There's a connection between Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, or probably with the family, that there's that qamis was a sign of that connection, the sign of family, the sign that they were holding on together. فَأَلْقُوهُ عَلَى وَجْهِ أَبِي يَأْتِ بَصِيرًا. Put it on my father's sight, on my father's face, and it will bring his sight back. وَأْتُونِي بِأَهْلِكُمْ أَجْمَعِينَ, and bring all the family, bring the whole tribe. Let them bring up the whole tribe. Let everyone else come with you. Now what happened? Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam had the wahi for two things. Number one, that they were forgiven. Number two is that with this garment, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would make that mu'jiza, would make that miracle, and it will bring about his father's sight back. وَلَمَّا فَصَلَتِ الْعِيرُ. Yet, when that caravan that was with the brothers, when it distant away from Yusuf alayhi salam's palace, the palace that he was in, and along with it was with the qamis, with his garment. قال أبوهم. Now here's one thing. Did they get to Prophet Yaqub yet? They didn't. They just left the palace. They just left the palace along with the garment. They still didn't get to Yaqub alayhi salam. They didn't reach the destination of Yaqub alayhi salam. قال أبوهم, their father, who? Yaqub alayhi salam. He said, إني, verily, لا أجد ريح يوسف. I can sense the smell of Yusuf. لولا أن تفندون. لولا أن تفندون, meaning that you're just going to probably accuse me of being probably going into old age and therefore losing my mind, losing my sense of understanding, losing my sense of rational understanding of things. قالوا تالله إنك لفي ضلالك القديم. Now here, they base things again on the materialistic side of it. And they just said, Tallahi, by Allah, you're still, إِنَّكَ لَفِي ضَلَالِكَ الْقَدِيمِ. You're still in that same manipulation, that same loss, that same confusion that you were in before. Yusuf is not around you. Yusuf is not here. You kept on thinking that he was going to be coming, but we told you it was going to be impossible. Now here, Yaqub alayhi salam was basing things that he's able to smell something. What was it? He was able to smell Yusuf even though he still didn't get to him. Now here's that connection. Don't base things. They were basing things on their materialistic rational data, is that he's not even around. So what are you talking about? You're just making up things. You're just, not understanding the reality of things. And it seems like, it happens a lot when somebody might actually go into some trauma, that they will always bring about those feelings and still live in a daydream that, no, it is possible. And they will still live in hope, where that hope might actually put them in a state of hysteria. And they were actually accusing Prophet Yaqub alayhi salam of falling in some kind of a hysteria, and where dalalik al-qadim, you're just going back to that old hysteria. You think he's there, he's not around. فَلَمَّا جَاءَ الْبَشِيرُ. Now when they reach the destination, جَاءَ الْبَشِيرُ, the person, coming, congratulating everyone. Al-Bashir is like that person that's congratulating everyone, saying it in a loud voice. ألقاه على وجهه فارتد بصيرا. He just threw that garment on his face, and فارتد بصيرا, his sight came back to him. قال ألم أقل لكم إني أعلم من الله ما لا تعلمون. At that moment he said, didn't I tell you, ألم أقل لكم, didn't I tell you that I know from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala what you don't know? Meaning what? That there was some information that I, as a prophet, have that you don't have. You base things based on the materialistic data, based on certain things around you. But as a prophet, he knows what you don't know. He doesn't base his data based on materialistic data, but he bases it on Allah, from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that something was going to come. It was just a matter of time. قالوا يا أبانا استغفر لنا ذنوبنا. That's when they said, they all said, يا أبانا, our dear father, استغفر لنا ذنوبنا. Seek forgiveness, ask forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for our sins. إنا كنا خاطئين. Verily, we were at sin. We were wrong in the things that we had committed. قال سوف أستغفر لكم ربي. He said, I will ask God Almighty, my Lord Almighty, to forgive you. إِنَّهُ هُوَ الْغَفُورُ الرَّحِيمُ. Verily, He is the one. That is Al-Ghafur Rahim. That is the most forgiving and most merciful. فَلَمَّا دَخَلُوا عَلَى يُوسُفَ آوَى إِلَيْهِ أَبَوَيْهِ. When they entered on Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, فَلَمَّا, wasn't long. They hustled, they hurried to go to Yusuf alayhi salam. Prophet Yaqub alayhi salam was not wanting to wait not a single minute. He was in rush to go to his son. فَلَمَّا دَخَلُوا, that's what that fa indicates. When دَخَلُوا عَلَى Yusuf, when they entered on Yusuf alayhi salam. So why didn't Yusuf himself actually go instead of actually bringing them all? There were different interpretations why Yusuf alayhi salam didn't go himself and actually bring him. There were different interpretations. Is it that there were some political issues that Yusuf alayhi salam did not want to reveal and probably cause some kind of a problem for that government, and reveal that he was actually not from Canaaniyin, which were the Canaanites, and that he was actually part of the Egyptians. Is that the reason that he didn't yet want to reveal his tribal connection, that he is actually part of a different group? So he wanted to, use wisdom and deal with things as they unravel, or as they unfold. But he needed to work on some political matters inside. That could be true. Or was it that he wanted to, ease it to not get his father into shock? There are so many different interpretations, but in the end is that Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, when they enter on Yusuf alayhi salam, awa ilayhi abaway, he couldn't but awa, meaning he went into he hugged them, he embraced his parents, even though his mother had already died. But abaway, there are different interpretations. Was it really Yaqub alayhi salam with his aunt, his mother's sister, or was it really his mother? But there are more scholars that said that it was actually his aunt, his father and his mother's sister, because his mother had died when he was a young boy. And that's why Prophet Yaqub alayhi salam was favoring Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, because his mother was gone. So he was giving him more affection to substitute for the loss of his mother. So awa ilayhi abaway, he takes and embraces his father and aunt, his mother's sister, which is very similar to the mother. وَقَالَ دُخُلُوا مِصْرَ إِنْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ آمِنِينَ. Then he tells them, enter Egypt. Enter Egypt. Why enter Egypt? Because again, this is that political side that is indicating why Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam didn't himself necessarily go, and there was some political things that he needed to work out. قَالَ دُخُلُوا مِصْرَ. Then he says, enter Egypt, insha'Allahu aminin. Aminin, why? That's what's indicating that there was some political things between the Canaanites, and Al-Qibt, and the Coptics, which are the Egyptians, and that was those tensions were actually causing those frictions that might lead to somebody entering from his tribe, from Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam's tribe, into Misr, into Egypt, that was going to be not safe because they happened to be from the different tribe. And again, political tensions had a lot to do with tribes, and had a lot to do where you're from. That geographical separation was based on tribe. So here Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam is now telling them, Udkhulu Misr, enter Misr, you are safe here. So is it that they are safe politically, or is it they are safe now from all the different kaid that all the different plots that his brothers were involved in? So two different interpretations, but in the end is that insha'Allahu aminin, they enter safe. And وَرَفَعَ أَبَوَيْهِ عَلَى الْعَرْشِ, he had risen his father and mother on the throne, or his aunt on the throne. وَخَرُّوا لَهُ سُجَّدًا, and everyone went into prostration, making sujood. That was part of their legislature, and their legislature does not mean that we could do the same. Remember, when we're talking about خَرُّوا لَهُ سُجَّدًا, that was a way of making tahiyya, of greeting, of putting respect. But that doesn't mean that we would do the same. Because in the legislature of Muhammad ﷺ, prostrating to anyone, even if it was the Prophet himself, is actually haram in the legislature. And this is part of a nasakh. Nasakh is an abrogation. So this was abrogated in Sharia Muhammad sallallahu in the Sharia of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu, so we can't do that. But let's continue. وَقَالَ يَا أَبَتِي. Now Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam is saying, يَا أَبَتِي, my dear father, هَذَا تَأْوِيلُ رُؤْيَايَ مِنْ قَبْلِ قَدْ جَعَلَهَا رَبِّي حَقًّا. This is the interpretation of the dream that I had before. قَدْ جَعَلَهَا رَبِّي حَقًّا. My Lord Almighty had made it true. Had made it true. وَقَدْ أَحْسَنَ بِي. Now here Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam is reminding all those that are around him and reminding himself as well. Ya abati, my dear father, this is exactly the dream that I had before. It was a dream. It was supposed to be something that was connected, not with a reality. But now we're seeing that even a prophet's dream is actually a prophecy. Is actually a prophecy that even as humans, as non-prophets, that we might consider that here's a rational materialistic argument and here's the data for it. But for a prophet, even a dream is actually reality. And here's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala قَدْ جَعَلَهَا رَبِّي حَقًّا, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it true, that even this is teaching Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, and that prophethood, it's not that he didn't know, but here Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam is reminding him of that dream that he had when he was a child, when in the beginning of the story Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam was saying in the beginning of the story that he had seen the moon and the moon and the stars actually doing sujood for him. وَقَدْ أَحْسَنَ بِي, taking that moment to remember. And not only did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala fulfill and bring that dream into reality, وَقَدْ أَحْسَنَ بِي إِذْ أَخْرَجَنِي مِنَ السِّجْنِ, and in fact he had actually أَحْسَنَ بِي, he was actually أحسن بي is like he made many good things to me. He brought so many good to me, so much good to me. إذ أخرجني من السجن, part of that. إذ أخرجني من السجن, he even got me out of the prison. In other words, got me out of the prison and even proved it to everyone that I was innocent. وَجَاءَ بِكُمْ, here's number one, and جَاءَ بِكُمْ, and brought my family, all of them, min al-badu, from the badu. Badu is like more of the Bedouins are pretty much those that are living far away, those that are living far away from the city. من بعد أن نزغ الشيطان بيني وبين إخوتي, after a shaitan had actually provoked, نزغ is like provoked, between me and my brothers. إن ربي لطيف لما يشاء, that God Almighty, Allah Almighty, Latif, is subtle, that Allah Almighty is subtle in every matter that He does. إنه هو العليم الحكيم, verily Allah Almighty is the most all-knowing and most wise. Next week, inshallah, we will continue. There's a lot you can never, I love the story, and you could never feel that you have had enough. I love the story. Inna Rabbi Latif, that Allah Almighty is subtle. In other words, don't base your knowledge on the world around you, and base your understanding of how you relate with everyone around you based on the materialistic things, and base it on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And base things on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because in the end Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Latif. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Latif. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala deals with things beyond those materialistic things that you might see in the world around you, because there is more to the world and to understanding the world than those materialistic datas that you have around you. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Latif, and He is Alimun Hakim. He is all-knowing and most wise. And most wise. You may think that you've got all this knowledge about the world and not realize that your understanding of the world is very limited. It is very shallow. It is very much dependent on the surface of things. The surface does not give you the total wisdom to relate and even make conclusions. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-Hakim. In order to make a legislature, in order to make a judgment, you need the complete data about everything around you. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Alimun Hakim. أَلَا يَعْلَمُ مَنْ خَلَقَ وَهُوَ اللَّطِيفُ الْخَبِيرُ. Verily, isn't the one that created, أَلَا يَعْلَمُ مَنْ خَلَقَ, isn't the one that created, أَلَا يَعْلَمُ مَنْ خَلَقَ وَهُوَ اللَّطِيفُ الْخَبِيرُ, and He is Al-Latif, He is the most subtle, and He is Al-Khabir. Al-Khabir is actually combining two things, ilm and hikmah. Al-Khabir is combining two things, the knowledge and the wisdom. Because Khabir actually means when you're a Khabir of something, you're an expert in it. What does expertise come from? Expertise comes from knowledge and comes from experience. So that's why when somebody's applying for a job, they always look for a degree and also look for experience in working within that degree, which is actually al-khibra. So here, in order to get al-khibra, what does khibra bring? Well, ilm and wisdom. The wisdom is basically knowing and anticipating where things might and what things might lead into before they even happen. And that's why to connect and understand the world around you based on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most important way in living your life on a social end, political end, financial end, and even the way you relate with the world around you. And Jazakumullah khairan, everyone. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer any questions. So you can raise your hand just like Sister A rose her hand, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. I hope we didn't lose on anything. I'm enjoying the story. I can go on and on, but I don't want you guys getting bored. So we'll continue next week, inshallah. And Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.